Deer Lake, Pennsylvania. The training camp they called Fighter's Heaven. Tuesday morning, March 18th, 1975. It was just past 7 o'clock when a rusted pickup truck came rumbling up the dirt road toward Muhammad Ali's famous mountain retreat. The man behind the wheel was Frank Mercer. Everyone called him Bull. He was 42 years old, a former Marine, and a Vietnam veteran with a Purple Heart he kept in a shoebox under his bed. He wore his only suit that morning, a brown two-piece he'd bought at a Goodwill store in Louisville for $11. His shoes were polished, his hair was combed, and his hands gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles had gone white. Bull Mercer needed this job. His leg had been injured 6 months earlier during a security assignment gone wrong. The bills had piled up. His savings had run out. And when a friend told him that Muhammad Ali was looking for another bodyguard, Bull had swallowed his pride and made the call. But pride wasn't the only thing Bull had to swallow that morning. Bull Mercer hated black people. He'd hated them his whole life. It was something he'd learned as a boy in rural Kentucky, passed down from his father and his father's father like an old family heirloom nobody ever questioned. And the man he hated most of all was Muhammad Ali. The camp was quiet as Bull parked his truck and stepped out into the cool mountain air. Mist hung low over the pine trees. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear the steady rhythm of a heavy bag being worked. Log cabins dotted the property. Large boulders stood near the main building, each one painted with the name of a fighter Ali had defeated. Bull saw black men everywhere, staff members moving between buildings, Muslims in traditional dress, a world completely foreign to everything he knew. His instinct told him to get back in his truck and drive away. But desperation is stronger than instinct. So he stayed, and then Muhammad Ali appeared. He came walking out of the main cabin wearing a white terry cloth robe. His entourage followed close behind. He moved with the easy confidence of a man who knew the whole world was watching. Because it was. In 1975, Muhammad Ali wasn't just the heavyweight champion of the world. He was the most famous person on the planet. Ali spotted Bull standing alone by his truck. He studied him for a moment. Then he walked straight toward him, his entourage scrambling to keep up. Bull's body went rigid. This was the man who had refused to serve in Vietnam, the man who had given speeches against the war while Bull's only son was fighting and dying in a jungle on the other side of the world. The man Bull had blamed for years, the man he'd cursed every night after Bobby's funeral. Ali stopped 3 feet away. He looked Bull up and down. Then he extended his hand and smiled. "I hear you don't like black folks much." The words hung in the air like smoke. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The entire camp seemed to freeze in place, waiting to see what would happen next. What happened over the next 18 months between these two men from the same Kentucky soil would become one of the most unlikely transformations in the history of American sports. Bull didn't flinch. He'd been in too many tight spots to let a question rattle him. He looked Muhammad Ali dead in the eyes and gave him the only answer he had. "I don't have to like you to protect you." Ali's entourage shifted uncomfortably. Drew Bundini Brown, Ali's assistant trainer and closest friend, stepped forward with fire in his eyes. "Champ, you can't be serious. This man hates us. I can see it in his eyes. He probably wishes you were dead." Bull said nothing. He didn't deny it. But Ali raised a hand to quiet Bundini. He was still looking at Bull with that same curious expression, like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "Why?" Ali asked. "Why don't you like black folks?" The question caught Bull off guard. Nobody had ever asked him that before. People either agreed with his views or they walked away from them. Nobody had ever asked him to explain. Bull's jaw tightened. The words came out hard and rough, like gravel scraping against concrete. I had a son, Bobby. He was 19 years old when he enlisted. Said he wanted to serve his country like his old man did. Bull paused. The memory still cut deep. He died in Vietnam, April 1971. I was sitting at home watching the news when the officers came to my door. You know what was on that television? Footage of war protesters, young people burning flags and spitting on soldiers, and you, giving speeches about how you wouldn't fight, how it was against your religion. Bull's voice cracked, but he pushed through. My boy died for this country, and you spit on everything he believed in. So yeah, I don't like you. I don't like what you stand for. But I need this job. And from what I hear, you need someone who won't get starstruck every time you walk into a room. Silence fell over the camp. Bundini looked ready to throw Bull off the property himself. The other staff members stared at the ground, waiting for Ali to dismiss this hateful man and send him back where he came from. But Ali didn't dismiss him. Instead, he nodded slowly. When he spoke, his voice was softer than before. Your son died serving his country. That took courage. He took a step closer to Bull. And you coming here, asking for work from a man you hate, that takes courage too. Ali glanced at his entourage, then back at Bull. I'm going to hire you, Bull Mercer. Bundini exploded. Champ, you can't be. I'm not finished, Ali said calmly. He never raised his voice, but the authority in it was unmistakable. He turned back to Bull. I'm not hiring you because I need a bodyguard. I've got plenty of those. I'm hiring you because I believe Allah put you in my path for a reason. Bull's eyes narrowed. What reason? I don't know yet, Ali admitted. But I intend to find out. Here's the deal. You're going to shadow me everywhere I go. Same hotels, same meals, same flights. For 6 months. You're going to see who I really am. Not what the newspapers say, not what the politicians say, the real me. He leaned in slightly. And I'm going to learn why you hate me. What made you this way? Because nobody is born hating, Bull. Somebody taught you, and I want to know who. Bull felt something stir in his chest, something uncomfortable. He pushed it down. And at the end of 6 months, he asked, if you still hate me, you can walk away. No hard feelings, but I don't think you will. Bull almost laughed. You're pretty confident for a man hiring someone who'd rather see him dead. Ali smiled. I've beaten bigger odds than you, Bull Mercer. He extended his hand again. Bull looked at it. Every part of him screamed to walk away. This was a trap, a trick, some kind of publicity stunt. But his truck was almost out of gas. His rent was 3 months overdue, and his daughter had stopped returning his calls because he couldn't help her with her own bills. He shook Ali's hand. I'll do my job, Bull said, but don't expect me to be your friend. Ali's grip was firm and warm. I don't want your friendship, Bull. I want your honesty. That's worth more. He released Bull's hand and turned to his stunned entourage. Get this man settled in. He starts today. As Ali walked back towards the main cabin, Bundini fell into step beside him, his voice low and urgent. Champ, this is crazy. That man is dangerous. Ali didn't slow down. Maybe, or maybe he's just lost. We'll find out. What neither man knew was that the next 18 months would strip away everything they believed about each other, and force both of them to confront the lies they'd been telling themselves their entire lives. To understand what happened between these two men, you have to understand where they came from. And the truth is, they came from the same place. Muhammad Ali was born Cassius Marcellus Clay Jr. on January 17, 1942, in Louisville, Kentucky. His father painted signs and billboards for a living. His mother cleaned houses for white families across town. They weren't poor, but they weren't comfortable either. Money was always tight. Dreams were always deferred. Young Cassius grew up under Jim Crow laws, separate water fountains, separate schools, separate seats on the bus. He learned early that the color of his skin made him less than human in the eyes of many white Americans. In 1955, when Cassius was 13 years old, a boy named Emmett Till was murdered in Mississippi. Till was the same age as Cassius. His crime was allegedly whistling at a white woman. They beat him. They shot him. They threw his body in a river, and the men who did it walked free. Cassius saw the photographs of Till's mutilated face in a magazine. He never forgot them. Years later, he would say that moment changed something inside him forever. In 1960, Cassius Clay won an Olympic gold medal in Rome. He came home a hero. But when he walked into a Louisville diner to order a meal, they refused to serve him. He was still just a black man in Kentucky. The gold medal around his neck meant nothing to the white folks behind the counter. That experience pushed Cassius toward the Nation of Islam. They taught him that black people were superior, that white people were devils. That separation was the only path to dignity. He changed his name to Muhammad Ali and embraced a worldview that saw all white people as the enemy. Bull Mercer was born Frank Mercer in 1933 in the coal country of eastern Kentucky. His father died in a mining accident when Bull was 12 years old. His mother took work cleaning houses to keep food on the table. Just like Ali's mother, same Kentucky, same struggle, different skin. Bull grew up hearing that black people were dangerous, dirty, inferior. He never questioned it. He never had a reason to. The few black people he encountered were servants or laborers. His world was white. His church was white. His schools were white. And everyone he trusted told him that's how God intended it to be. At 18, Bull joined the Marines to escape the poverty that had swallowed his father. He served 2 tours in Korea. He earned medals. He built a life. And when his son Bobby was born in 1952, Bull promised himself that his boy would have opportunities he never had. Bobby grew up idolizing his father. In 1970, at 19 years old, he enlisted in the army. He wanted to serve his country just like his old man. Bull was proud. His wife was terrified. But Bobby shipped out to Vietnam with a smile on his face and a letter from his father in his pocket. 7 months later, Bobby came home in a box. Bull was watching the news when the officers knocked on his door. The television showed footage of anti-war protests, young people waving signs and burning flags. And then they cut to Muhammad Ali giving a speech about why he refused to fight. "I ain't got no quarrel with them Viet Cong," Ali said on that screen. "No Viet Cong ever called me a racial slur." In that moment, Bull's grief turned to rage. He blamed the protesters. He blamed the politicians. But most of all, he blamed Muhammad Ali, the famous black man who wouldn't serve, the man who made it acceptable to spit on soldiers, the man who was alive and free while Bobby was dead in the ground. Bull carried that hatred for 4 years. It became part of him, a weight he couldn't put down. And now, by some cruel twist of fate, he was standing in that man's training camp, agreeing to protect him with his life. But here's what Bull didn't know. By 1975, Muhammad Ali was changing too. Elijah Muhammad, the leader of the Nation of Islam, had died that February. His death left Ali questioning everything he'd believed for over a decade. The teachings about white devils, the demand for separation, the idea that hate was justified if it was directed at the right people. Ali looked around at his own life and saw the contradictions. Angelo Dundee, his trainer, was a white Italian-American from Philadelphia. Dundee had been with Ali since 1960, 15 years of loyalty, 15 years of friendship. How could Angelo be a devil? He'd been more faithful than Ali's own brothers. Ali was beginning to understand something that would take Bull much longer to learn. Hate is heavy. It takes effort to carry, and at some point, you have to ask yourself if it's worth the wait. Both men were prisoners. Ali was imprisoned by the doctrine of separation. Bull was imprisoned by the doctrine of supremacy. Both had been taught to hate by people they trusted. Both had built their identities around that hatred. And now, by circumstance and desperation, they were about to set each other free. Because what unfolded between these two Kentucky men would prove that the most powerful force against hatred isn't argument or confrontation, it's simply being seen. The first 2 months were the hardest. Bull did his job. He stayed close to Ali. He scanned crowds for threats. He checked hotel rooms before Ali entered. He rode in the front seat of every car and stood at the door of every meeting. He was professional, efficient, silent. But inside, he was at war with himself. Every kind act Ali performed confused him. Every gentle word contradicted everything Bull believed about black people. And there were so many kind acts, so many gentle words. The first crack came in Louisville. Ali's motorcade was passing through downtown when Ali suddenly ordered the driver to stop. Bull's hand went to his weapon. He scanned the street for danger. But there was no danger. Just a homeless man sitting on the sidewalk with a cardboard sign. A veteran, judging by his faded army jacket. Ali got out of the car. His security team scrambled to follow, but Ali waved them back. He walked over to the homeless man and sat down beside him on the concrete. Bull watched through the window as Ali talked to the man for nearly 20 minutes. He gave him money. He shook his hand. He treated him like a human being when everyone else had treated him like trash. When Ali got back in the car, Bull couldn't help himself. "Why'd you do that?" Ali looked at him calmly. "Do what?" "Stop. Talk to him. Give him money. He's nobody." Ali shook his head slowly. "He's not nobody, Bull. He's a veteran. Like you. Like your son. One bad break, and that could be any of us sitting on that sidewalk. Including me. Including you." Bull had no response. He turned back to face the front. But the image of Muhammad Ali sitting on a dirty sidewalk with a homeless white veteran stayed with him for days. The second crack came in Chicago. Ali was leaving a restaurant when a young white boy broke free from his parents and ran toward him. The parents looked terrified. Their son was approaching the most controversial black man in America, and they didn't know what would happen. Ali knelt down until he was eye level with the boy. He talked to him for 10 minutes. He made him laugh. He signed an autograph on a napkin and handed it to him with both hands, like it was something precious. Bull read the words as the boy walked away. To Jimmy, be brave, be kind, Muhammad Ali. That night, back at the hotel, Bull said something he never expected to say. "You didn't have to do that, with the kid." Ali looked up from his Quran. "Do what? Be kind to a child?" "His parents. They were scared of you. Most people in your position would have walked right past." Ali smiled softly. "Most people in my position forget what it feels like to be small. I never want to forget that, Bull. The day I stop seeing children is the day I stop being human." Bull said nothing more, but something shifted inside him that night. A wall that had stood for 40 years developed its first crack. The third crack came at Deer Lake. Bull received a phone call from his daughter. She was crying. Her husband had left her. She couldn't make rent. She was going to lose her apartment. Bull listened helplessly. He had nothing to give her. His own accounts were empty. When he hung up the phone, he sat alone in his cabin and stared at the wall. 3 days later, Bull's daughter called again. But this time, she wasn't crying. "Daddy, I don't know what you did, but thank you. Someone paid my rent, 3 months in advance. The landlord said an anonymous donor." Bull knew. He didn't have to ask. He found Ali in the gym that afternoon and confronted him. "You paid my daughter's rent." It wasn't a question. Ali kept hitting the heavy bag. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me. I know it was you." "Why?" Ali stopped. He turned to face Bull. His eyes were calm, almost gentle. "Your daughter didn't choose her father's pride, Bull. She's struggling. I could help, so I helped." "I don't need your charity." "It's not charity. It's what people do for each other when they're not too busy hating." Bull felt something he hadn't felt in years. Shame, hot and heavy in his chest. He turned and walked out without another word. But that night, alone in his cabin, Frank Bull Mercer cried for the first time since Bobby's funeral. The fourth crack came during a quiet moment. Bull woke at 4 in the morning to use the bathroom. Through his window, he saw a light on in the main cabin. Curious, he walked over and looked inside. Ali was on his knees, facing east, deep in prayer. His forehead touched the ground. His lips moved silently. There was no audience, no cameras, no one to perform for. Bull had always thought of Ali's religion as a show, a costume he wore to anger white people. But watching him pray alone in the dark, Bull realized something that shook him. This man actually believes. Bull didn't understand Islam. He didn't agree with it. But he recognized devotion when he saw it, and he couldn't help but respect it. The fifth crack came in a hotel room late one night. Bull and Ali were in separate beds, both staring at the ceiling. The silence had stretched on for nearly an hour when Bull finally spoke. "Why'd you really hire me?" Ali didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was soft. "Because you remind me of my father." Bull turned his head. "Your father was black." "My father was proud," Ali said, "and hurt, and angry at a world that refused to see him. Just like you, Bull, just like you." He paused. "Pain doesn't have a color. Took me a long time to learn that." Bull stared at the ceiling for a long time after that. He didn't sleep until dawn. The sixth crack came on what would have been Bobby's birthday. Bull disappeared that morning without telling anyone. Ali noticed. He had his people track Bull's movements. When he found out where Bull had gone, he went alone. Bull was standing at his son's grave in a Louisville cemetery. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to see Muhammad Ali approaching. "How'd you find me?" "I asked around." Ali stopped beside the grave. He looked at the headstone. Robert Frank Mercer, 1952 to 1971. Beloved son. He said nothing. He didn't preach. He didn't offer empty words about God's plan or Bobby being in a better place. He just stood there, present, silent, human. They stayed like that for nearly an hour. 2 men from Kentucky, standing over the grave of a boy who died too young. Finally, Bull spoke. His voice was barely a whisper. "I blamed you. For years. I blamed you for his death." Ali nodded slowly. "I know. It wasn't fair." "No, it wasn't." Bull's shoulders began to shake. The tears came without warning. Years of grief he'd converted into hatred came pouring out. Ali put a hand on his shoulder and let him cry. When Bull finally composed himself, Ali spoke gently. "I didn't kill your son, Bull, and hating me won't bring him back. All hate does is keep you from living your own life." Bull wiped his face. He looked at Ali with different eyes. "I don't know how to stop." Ali squeezed his shoulder. You already started. The seventh crack came at a public event. A man in the crowd shouted racial slurs at Ali. Security moved to intervene, but before they could, the man lunged forward with something in his hand. Bull didn't think. His body moved before his mind could catch up. He stepped between Ali and the threat, taking the man down with a single, precise motion. It was only later, after the police had come and the crowd had dispersed, that Bull realized what he'd done. He had risked his life to protect Muhammad Ali. His body had moved on instinct, and his instinct was to save the man he'd spent 4 years hating. The eighth crack was a confession. They were sitting on the porch of Ali's cabin, watching the sun set over the mountains. "I was wrong about you," Bull said. Ali turned to look at him. "I was wrong too, Bull. I used to believe all white people were devils. Men like you and Angelo. You proved me wrong." Bull shook his head. "I'm no saint." "Neither am I. But we're both here, both trying. That has to count for something." Bull was quiet for a moment. "What happens now?" Ali smiled. "Now? We keep going. We keep learning. We keep being honest with each other." He extended his hand. "Brothers?" Bull looked at that hand. A year ago, he would have spat on it. 6 months ago, he would have ignored it. But now, he shook it firmly. "Brothers!" The ninth crack was public. A reporter asked Ali about the rumors, about the racist bodyguard he'd hired. Ali's response was broadcast across the country. "Bull Mercer is my brother. We're both from Kentucky. We both grew up poor. We both love this country. The only difference is he served in Vietnam and I didn't. I respect him for that, and he respects me for standing by my beliefs. That's what America should be." When Bull heard those words, he felt something he hadn't felt in 40 years. He felt seen, but the true test of their transformation was still to come. Because in October 1976, both men would face a moment that would prove whether their brotherhood was real or just words. Louisville, Kentucky, October 1976. Muhammad Ali was coming home. A local charity had invited him to speak at a fundraiser for underprivileged youth. Ali had accepted without hesitation. Louisville was where he was born, where he learned to fight, where he first dreamed of becoming champion. No matter how far he traveled, Louisville would always be home. But not everyone in Louisville wanted him there. 3 days before the event, the local chapter of the Ku Klux Klan announced a counter-protest. They would line the streets outside the venue. They would carry signs and Confederate flags. They would remind Muhammad Ali that he wasn't welcome in their city. Ali's security team urged him to cancel. The threats were real. The danger was serious. But Ali refused. "I'm not hiding from cowards in bedsheets," he said. "I'm going home." Bull Mercer heard about the Klan protest and felt something cold settle in his stomach. He knew these people. He had grown up with people like them. His own brother-in-law, Carl, was a Klan sympathizer. They had shared beers and hunting trips and Sunday dinners. Carl had been at Bobby's funeral. He had stood beside Bull at the grave. Bull hadn't spoken to Carl in over a year, not since he'd started working for Ali. Carl had called him a traitor, a race mixer. Worse. Bull had hung up the phone and never called back. Now he was about to drive straight into a crowd of men who thought exactly like Carl. Men who thought exactly like Bull used to think. The morning of the event, Bull found Ali in his hotel room. "You sure about this, champ?" Ali was tying his shoes. He looked up with calm eyes. "Are you?" Bull didn't answer. He didn't know the answer. The motorcade left the hotel at 6 o'clock in the evening. 3 black cars moving through the streets of Louisville toward the downtown convention center. As they approached the venue, Bull saw them. Dozens of clan members and sympathizers lined both sides of the street. They held signs with words too ugly to repeat. They waved Confederate flags. They chanted slurs that echoed off the buildings like thunder. Bull sat in the front passenger seat, scanning the crowd. His heart was pounding. His hands were steady. He had been in combat. He had faced enemy fire. But this was different. This was personal. The motorcade slowed at a red light. The crowd pressed closer. Faces twisted with hate screamed at the windows. Bull kept his eyes moving, looking for weapons, looking for anyone who might break through the line. And then he saw Carl. His brother-in-law was standing at the front of the crowd, holding a sign. Their eyes met through the window. Carl's face went from anger to shock to disgust in the span of 2 seconds. Carl pushed through the crowd toward the car. He reached the window and spat on the glass. "Frank Mercer," he shouted. "What the hell happened to you? You protecting these people now?" Bull's jaw tightened. He said nothing. "Your daddy would be ashamed," Carl screamed. "Your boy Bobby would be ashamed. You're a disgrace to your family and your race." Something inside Bull snapped. Not into anger, into clarity. He opened the car door. The security team panicked. Ali's other bodyguards shouted for him to stay inside. But Bull was already stepping out onto the street, closing the door behind him. The crowd went quiet. Everyone watched. Ali watched through the window, his face unreadable. Bull walked directly toward Carl. His brother-in-law stood his ground, but Bull could see the uncertainty in his eyes. They stood face to face, 2 men who had once shared holidays and hunting trips and family dinners. 2 men who had once believed the same things. Bull spoke first. His voice was steady and clear. "You want to talk about Bobby?" Carl's chin lifted defiantly. "Bobby died for this country while you're driving around with the man who spit on his sacrifice." Bull shook his head slowly. "Bobby died believing in something bigger than hate, Carl. He believed in honor, in service, in protecting people who couldn't protect themselves." He took a step closer. "I spent years being angry at the wrong people. I blamed Muhammad Ali for Bobby's death because it was easier than facing the truth. The truth is, Bobby chose to serve. He was brave. He was good. And he would be ashamed of what I became after he died." Carl's face reddened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about," Bull said. "I spent 40 years hating people I never knew, blaming people for things they didn't do, carrying poison in my heart because men like you told me it was righteous." He pointed at the car where Ali sat watching. "That man showed me more kindness in 18 months than you showed me in 20 years. He paid my daughter's rent when I couldn't. He stood with me at Bobby's grave without saying a word. He treated me like a human being when I didn't deserve it." Bull's voice rose so the crowd could hear. "You want to know what Bobby would think? Bobby would think his father finally woke up. Bobby would be proud that I stopped being a coward hiding behind hate." He looked around at the crowd, at the signs, at the flags, at the faces twisted with the same poison he had carried for so long. "I was you," Bull said. "I thought like you. I talked like you. I hated like you. And it nearly destroyed me." He turned back to Carl. "I'm done. I'm done with this. I'm done with you." Carl stood frozen. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Bull walked back to the car. The crowd parted for him in silence. He opened the door and climbed inside. His hands were shaking. Ali reached over and gripped his shoulder. He didn't say anything at first. He just held on. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen." Bull stared straight ahead. Tears were streaming down his face. "I should have done it years ago." You did it today. That's what matters." The light turned green. The motorcade moved forward. The crowd faded behind them. Bull Mercer had walked into that crowd a man divided. He walked out whole. The story spread fast. By the next morning, newspapers across Kentucky were running headlines about Ollie's bodyguard confronting the Klan. Reporters called it unprecedented. A white man with known racist ties publicly denouncing his former beliefs in defense of Muhammad Ali. The reactions were mixed. Some people called Bull a hero. Others called him a traitor. He received hate mail from former friends, threatening phone calls in the middle of the night. Someone threw a brick through his truck window with a note that said, "Race traitor." But he also received letters he didn't expect. A woman from Tennessee wrote to say her husband had been in the Klan for 30 years. After reading about Bull, he burned his robes and apologized to their black neighbors. A man from Georgia wrote to say he had been teaching his children to hate. Bull's story made him stop. A teenager from Ohio wrote to say he had been recruited by white supremacists at his school. He quit after reading what Bull said on that Louisville street. One letter changed everything. It came from Bull's daughter, Sarah. She had seen the news coverage. She had read his words. "Daddy," she wrote, "I'm proud of you for the first time in years. I didn't know how to tell you, but I've been dating a black man for 6 months. I was terrified to introduce him to you. Now I can't wait for you to meet him. His name is Marcus. He's kind and smart and he loves me. I think you'll like him. I think the man you've become will like him." Bull read that letter 7 times. Then he sat down and wrote back, "Bring him home, sweetheart. I'd be honored to meet him." Ali's transformation continued too. By 1977, Ali had fully left the Nation of Islam. He converted to mainstream Sunni Islam, which taught unity instead of separation. He stopped preaching about white devils. He started talking about brotherhood. "I was wrong," Ali said in an interview. "I used to think all white people were the enemy. But I've met too many good ones to believe that anymore. Angelo Dundee, Tim Shanahan, Bull Mercer. These men taught me that goodness has no color." In 1981, Ali officially retired from boxing. He held a celebration in Los Angeles for friends and family. Among the invited guests was Frank Bull Mercer. Ali spotted him in the crowd and pulled him onto the stage. "I want everyone to meet someone," Ali said into the microphone. "This is my brother Bull. He came to me 6 years ago with hate in his heart. He'd been taught his whole life that black people were less than human, and I'd been taught that white people were devils." Ali put his arm around Bull's shoulder. "We were both wrong, and we were both brave enough to admit it. If we can become brothers, so can anyone in this room. So can anyone in this country." The crowd rose to their feet. The applause went on for 3 full minutes. Bull couldn't speak. He just stood there with tears in his eyes, accepting something he never thought he deserved. Acceptance. Over the years that followed, Bull and Ali stayed close. When Ali's Parkinson's disease grew worse, Bull visited him regularly. He would sit beside Ali's bed and talk about the old days, about the training camps, about the long car rides, about the night in Louisville when everything changed. Ollie couldn't always respond. The disease had stolen his voice, but his eyes said everything. Bull also began speaking at schools and community centers. He told his story to anyone who would listen. "I wasted 40 years of my life hating people I never knew," he would say. "Muhammad Ali didn't argue with me. He didn't fight me. He just let me see who he really was, and once I saw him clearly, I couldn't hate him anymore." The transformation didn't stop with Bull. His daughter married Marcus in 1978. Bull walked her down the aisle. He danced at the reception. He held his first grandchild, a beautiful girl named Maya, and promised her she would grow up in a world with a little less hate. Because of him, because one man had the courage to hire his enemy, and another man had the courage to change. But the truest measure of their transformation wouldn't be seen in their lifetimes. It would be seen in the generations that followed. In the children and grandchildren who grew up in a world slightly less divided, because two men from Kentucky chose to see each other as human beings. Louisville, Kentucky, June 10th, 2016. Muhammad Ali was gone. He had died 1 week earlier in Scottsdale, Arizona. He was 74 years old. Parkinson's disease had slowly stolen his voice, his movement, and finally his life. But it had never stolen his spirit. Now the world had come to say goodbye. The funeral was held in Louisville, the same city where Cassius Clay had been born, the same city where he'd learned to box, the same city where he'd been denied service at a diner after winning an Olympic gold medal. The same city where a man named Bull Mercer had stood up against his own family in defense of a man he once hated. Thousands of people lined the streets to watch the procession. They came from every corner of the globe. Presidents and prime ministers, athletes and actors, ordinary people who had been touched by Ali's extraordinary life. Inside the memorial service, the speakers told stories of courage and conviction. They spoke of Ali's fights in the ring and his fights outside it. They spoke of his humor, his generosity, his unwavering commitment to his beliefs. Bill Clinton spoke. He called Ali a universal symbol of hope. Billy Crystal spoke. He made the crowd laugh and cry in equal measure. And then an old man rose slowly from his seat in the family section. He was 83 years old. His hair was white. His body was frail. He walked with a cane, but his eyes were clear and bright. Frank Bull Mercer made his way to the podium. The crowd murmured. Most of them didn't know who he was, but Ali's family knew. They had invited him personally. They had asked him to speak. Bull gripped the podium with both hands. He looked out at the thousands of faces watching him. He took a deep breath. 41 years ago, he began, I walked into Muhammad Ali's training camp with hate in my heart. The crowd went silent. I blamed him for my son's death. Bobby was 19 years old when he died in Vietnam, and I spent years convinced that Muhammad Ali was responsible, that his speeches against the war had gotten my boy killed, that he was a coward and a traitor. Bull's voice wavered, but he pressed on. I hated him for the color of his skin. I hated him for his religion. I hated him for everything he represented. And when I showed up at his camp looking for work, I didn't try to hide it. I told him straight to his face that I didn't like black folks, that I blamed him for Bobby. He paused. You know what he did? He hired me anyway. A murmur rippled through the crowd. He said Allah had put me in his path for a reason. He said he wanted to find out why I hated him. He said he wanted me to see who he really was. Bull shook his head slowly. I thought he was crazy. I thought it was some kind of trick, but I needed the money, so I took the job. I figured I'd do my time and walk away. He looked toward Ali's casket. I didn't walk away. I couldn't. Bull's eyes glistened. For 18 months I watched that man. I watched him stop his motorcade to sit with homeless veterans on the street. I watched him kneel down to make little children laugh. I watched him pray alone in the dark when no one was watching. He gripped the podium tighter. He paid my daughter's rent when I couldn't afford to help her. He never told anyone. He didn't want credit. He just saw someone struggling and he helped. Bull's voice cracked. And when I went to my son's grave on Bobby's birthday, Muhammad Ali showed up. He didn't say a word. He just stood there with me. For an hour, just being present, just being human. Tears rolled down Bull's weathered cheeks. People ask me all the time. They say, "How did Muhammad Ali change you? What did he do?" But that's the wrong question. He looked out at the crowd. The real question is, how did I stay hateful for so long? How did I spend 40 years of my life poisoning myself with hate when the cure was so simple? He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Muhammad didn't give me anything I didn't already have. He didn't perform some kind of magic. He just held up a mirror, day after day, month after month. He showed me who he was until I couldn't pretend he was a monster anymore. Bull straightened his shoulders. Hate isn't natural. That's what I learned. We have to be taught to hate. Somebody has to show us how. My father taught me. His father taught him. It goes back generations. He pointed towards the casket. But anything that can be taught can be unlearned. And Muhammad Ali taught me how to unlearn. Not through arguments, not through force, not through shame, just through being himself, just through showing me kindness when I didn't deserve it. Bull's voice grew stronger. You can't hate someone you eat breakfast with every day. You can't hate someone who sits with you at your son's grave. You can't hate someone who treats you better than your own family. He paused to let the words settle. Muhammad Ali was the greatest boxer who ever lived. Everybody knows that. But that's not why I'm standing here today. Bull looked at the casket one more time. I'm standing here because he was the greatest human being I ever knew. He looked at a broken, hateful man, and he saw a brother. He looked at an enemy, and he saw a friend. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. He was right. We were brothers. Two boys from Kentucky who took different paths to the same place. Both of us taught to hate by people we trusted. Both of us prisoners of our own beliefs. Bull placed his hand over his heart. He set me free, and I spent the last 40 years trying to pass that freedom on, to my children, to my grandchildren, to anyone who would listen. He straightened up and spoke clearly. That's Muhammad Ali's real legacy, not the championships, not the fame, not the money. Bull's voice rang through the hall. His legacy is every heart that opened because his heart opened first. Every family that healed because he showed us healing was possible. Every person who put down their hate because they saw what happened when two enemies chose to see each other as human beings. He gripped the podium one final time. Muhammad Ali didn't just change boxing. He didn't just change sports. He changed people, one at a time, starting with a bitter old racist from Kentucky who thought he was beyond saving. Bull smiled through his tears. He saved me anyway. He stepped away from the podium and walked slowly toward the casket. The hall was completely silent. Even the cameras stopped clicking. Bull placed his weathered hand on the polished wood. He leaned in close and whispered words meant only for his brother. Thank you, champ, for everything, for seeing me when I couldn't see myself, for believing in me when I didn't deserve it. He patted the casket gently. I'll see you soon, brother. Save me a seat. Bull turned and walked back to his chair. The silence held for 3 more seconds. Then the crowd rose to their feet. The applause began softly and built until it filled the entire hall like thunder. They weren't just applauding Bull Mercer. They were applauding what he represented, what he and Muhammad Ali had proven together. That hate is not destiny, it's a choice, that enemies can become brothers, that the most powerful force in the world isn't violence or anger or fear, it's simply being seen. Muhammad Ali was laid to rest that afternoon in Cave Hill Cemetery in Louisville, Kentucky, the same Kentucky soil where he had been born, the same Kentucky soil where Bull Mercer had been born. 2 boys from the same state, 2 men who had every reason to hate each other, 2 brothers who proved that transformation is possible for anyone willing to open their eyes. The funeral ended. The crowds went home. The world moved on. But the legacy remained, in the children who grew up hearing Bull's story and chose kindness over hatred, in the families who reconciled across racial lines because they saw it was possible, in the countless small moments of grace that rippled outward from one simple act of courage. Muhammad Ali hired a man who hated him. He fed him. He paid his daughter's rent. He stood with him at his son's grave. He called him brother in front of the whole world. And in doing so, he proved something that America desperately needed to hear. We are not prisoners of our past. We are not slaves to what we were taught. Every single day, we get to choose who we want to be. Bull Mercer chose hate for 40 years. Then he chose something different. Muhammad Ali chose separation for a decade. Then he chose something different. They chose each other. And that choice echoed through generations. That's the story of Muhammad Ali and Bull Mercer. Two men from the same Kentucky soil. Two enemies who became brothers. Two prisoners who set each other free. Not through violence, not through argument, not through force, through the simple, revolutionary act of being seen. His legacy is every heart that opened because his heart opened first. And hearts are still opening today.